Yes, poor Fuego has dragged behind her a reputation of a redneck tuning car. The queen of the supermarket parking lot nailed to the pillory in But Who Killed Pamela Rose? A poor man's Porsche, some said, with that smug smile of someone who drives a Golf GTI. But here's the thing, this unloved Fuego was not just a rolling gag. No, it had ambitions. When it came out of the factories with its bold design and this futuristic line that seemed straight out of a sketch by Jean-Paul Gaultier after 3 pastis, it turned heads. Sure, its positioning was rather shaky, stuck between the roars of the GTIs and the size of serious sedans, but it found its audience, and not only in the French suburbs because the Fuego was sold internationally. And today, the wheel turns. The nostalgics of the 80s rediscover its unique lines, its kitsch interior as desired, and above all the pleasure of a large coupe as it no longer exists. Today we return to the history of a prestigious classic car. In the 70s, Renault had a brilliant plan. They thought, why make one car when we can make two without too much effort? Thus were born the R15 and the R17, a duo of coupes based on the good old R12, made up with as much finesse as a look-alike on a karaoke night. The R15 was the popular version for the average Joe. The R17 was a step up, more chic and sporty. And it worked. The idea was simple, yet brilliant at the time. Offering affordable cars but a tad attractive, where Peugeot played the aristocrats with its 504 coupes and convertibles that cost an arm and a leg, or even two if you wanted the version with leather. As a result, between 1961 and 1979, Renault flogged no less than 348,856 copies of its double-duty coupes. A heck of a score, enough to satisfy the accountants at Renault. Sadly, all good things must end. By the end of the 70s, Renault knew that these two divas were aging, their replacement was already written in the stars, and that's when the Renault 18 came on the scene in 1978. And in a corner of this style office, a young designer named Michel Jardin, under the guidance of Gaston Juchet, was given a mission to imagine a coupe derived from the future R18. In short, redo the R15-R17 trick, but with a little more panache. In January 1975, Renault officially launched Project 136, known as the future Renault Fuego. And for that, what better than to recycle the chassis of the R18? That's where Robert Opron comes in, a legend of design, a man who had already designed the Citroën SM. Opron decides to give the Fuego a bold stylistic signature, a rear bubble. And Renault was not alone in this futuristic trip. Just a year later, Porsche launched the 924 with a strangely similar rear window. A coincidence? Maybe. But what is certain is that this resemblance would become a real problem for the Fuego. While everyone marveled at the Porsche 924, the Fuego inherited the unenviable title of the poor man's 924. However, a closer look reveals that the Fuego was far from outdated. Its design was perfectly in tune with the times, and by the end of 1979, after years of gestation, drawing, and probably heated debates about the size of the rear window, the Renault Fuego was ready. Production starts in the Maubeuge factory. Renault, inflated with optimism or arrogance, depending on your perspective, proudly unveiled its new coupe in March 1980 at the Geneva Motor Show. And unlike the Renault R15-R17, the Fuego is going solo. A single car, but available in several versions to please everyone. At the bottom of the ladder, you have the TL, a version as bare as a student's room. Just above, the GTL, which tries to put on airs with a bit more equipment, but nothing transcendent either. And these two versions drag a modest Cleon Fonte engine of 1,397 cubic centimeters and 64 horses. And for thrill seekers, Renault offers a 5-speed gearbox, optional of course. But it's not over. The GTS version arrives with a bit more muscle, a clean alu engine of 1,647 cm, 3 developing 96 horses and a standard 5-speed gearbox. And there, it starts to become interesting. However, here's where it gets weird because of course it's Renault. No injection on the Fuego, even though the R17 had previously introduced one. And the strangest thing about all this, the real high-end versions, the TX and GTX only arrive in July 1980, equipped with a Miele 1995 Cinim 3 engine, developing 110 horses, an engine developed jointly with Peugeot. That said, these TX and GTX versions save the day a bit. More powerful, better equipped, they finally give the Fuego a look worthy of its name. The GTX in particular offers a hint of luxury. But let's be honest, by this point, Renault had already missed the opportunity to make a great first impression. A coupe that promised a lot, but like a wet firework, didn't quite explode as it should have. Especially since when the Fuego finally hits the market, it doesn't find itself alone on the dance floor. No, it arrives in a room already filled with well-established European coupes. On one side, you have the Opel Manta B, solid, reassuring, in place since 1975. Especially popular in Germany and England, it has this little reliable side that, let's be honest, makes many buy it without even raising an eyebrow. Then there is the Ford Capri 3, which was relaunched in 1978 with a look that says, I am a muscle car, but I didn't dare. And then there is the Volkswagen Scirocco 2, which arrives in 1981 with modern lights. In fact, the Scirocco is the cool girl when we were kids, the one who skates and still does better in school than you. The Peugeot 504 Coupe is also starting to smell seriously like mothballs. The 504 5.6 is still there, sure, but it's at the end of its career and is mostly sold to notaries who don't know what to do with their weekend. As a result, between the Opel, the Ford, the Volkswagen, and even the Peugeot, the Fuego enters a fierce battle where everyone ends up scoring about the same. The Capri gets away with 324,000 copies. The Scirocco follows closely with 291,000 units, and even the Manta manages to place 161,000 copies. The Fuego had no reason to be ashamed of its performance, but faced with such tough competition, it had a challenging task. Yet, the year 1980 starts strong. The Fuego comes off the assembly lines like croissants on a Sunday morning at the bakery. 75,425 units produced. It's almost too much for the Maubeuge factory, which calls for backup from the Douai factory, forced to put aside its Renault 5s to churn out an additional 8,500 Fuegos. Nearly 50% of the cars are exported to other countries. At Renault, they say it's time to celebrate with champagne. However, the novelty effect fades rapidly. In 1981, sales plummet, only 55,000 units. The Fuego is not a bad car, far from it, but its price is a real problem. The oil crisis of 1979 doesn't help, and the young people, they don't want a big, quiet coupe. No, they want fun, performance, character, and for that, they turn to small sports cars like the Renault 5 Alpine Turbo. Look, a Renault 5 Alpine Turbo with 110 horsepower, a fiery temperament, and a price of 56,800 francs in France. A Fuego GTX with the same power but much less exciting costs 20,000 francs more for a car that looks like a discounted Porsche. In parallel, at the beginning of the 80s, Renault had a great idea to seriously establish itself in the United States by gradually buying American Motors Corporation. And over there, Americans are crazy about coupes. Renault believes the Fuego will be a success. Yes, the Fuego has its strengths, its design is modern, it's maneuverable, and its engine isn't bad. Well, in Europe, because once it goes through the big grinder of American standards, it's a different story. The 1.69 quarts engine is reduced to 82 HP. Renault didn't stop there. In 1983, it sent the 107 horsepower Fuego Turbo to the US market. Despite everything, the Fuego finds its audience. With its unique look and exoticism, it attracts customers in search of originality. In total, 41,000 copies were sold in the United States and Canada. Not bad for a little French girl in the land of big engines. Today, the Fuego has left a lasting imprint on the other side of the Atlantic. She has fans, clubs, and a certain aura. Importation stopped in June 1985, but Renault has therefore succeeded in making the Fuego a cool and offbeat product in America, despite its 82 little starting horses. Back in Europe in July 1982, Renault decides to shake up the Fuego with an improbable idea, a turbo diesel version. Yes, a diesel in a car that's supposed to be fun and sexy. Under the hood, there's a 2-liter 86 horsepower engine, already seen in the Renault 20 and 30. But with the magic of lightweight, the Fuego becomes the fastest diesel in the world, 175 kilometers per hour. Sure, it's not enough to scare a Golf GTI, but for a diesel, it's a record. But it's in July 1983 that Renault rolls out the heavy artillery, restyling the Fuego and introducing a true high-end sports model, the Fuego Turbo. Its 1,565 cm 3-engine topped with a turbo outputs 132 horsepower and pushes the beast to 200 km per hour. Not bad, especially since it only weighs 1,165 kilograms. Except that at over 90,000 francs, it's out of budget for many. And there, it's a disaster. Sales plummet, 37,000 copies in 1983. France, which until then supported the Fuego, begins to abandon it. The reason? The Golf GTI and the brand new 205 GTI hit the market. Fast, sexy, modern, and much cheaper. The Fuego, with its look that seemed futuristic 3 years earlier, begins to look dated. Worse, its image is deteriorating at an alarming rate. What was supposed to be an icon becomes a joke, and this is probably where the image of a tacky car is born. Rarely has a car experienced such a rapid descent into hell. And that's how a car that was supposed to embody the future ends up being relegated to the background. By the mid-80s, the Fuego is nothing more than a bit player in a bustling Renault catalog. Between the Renault 25 playing the limousines, the Espace revolutionizing the minivan, and the real sports cars like the Alpine V6 GT or the Super 5 GT Turbo, the Fuego doesn't stand out. Argentina survives by exporting, remaining loyal to coupes, which the country loves. The United States of America is still holding up slightly, but not for long. In June 1985, Renault marks the end of the Fuego's European career. The last copy comes off the Maubeuge assembly lines. But as they don't like to waste at Renault, the stocks are quietly liquidated until 1987. The story continues as Argentina, the true promised land for Renault coupes, restarts production. Renault has been an institution there since the 60s, and the Fuego finds a loyal audience there. Production continues until 1992 with a total of 265,367 units produced worldwide. A long but uneven career between fleeting glory and rapid downgrading. But perhaps his career could have gone further if Renault had released a convertible version. Officially, it never existed, but like all great legends, there is a grain of truth. Let's go back to 1982, heading to the United States once again. Renault dreams big and wants to seduce the Americans who love convertibles. To realize this idea, the company calls on LES, the French specialist in atypical bodywork, to design a convertible version of the Fuego. And Elias doesn't do things by halves. By the end of 1982, the company delivers a convertible Fuego to American Motors Corporation, Renault's partner, across the Atlantic. The result? A beautiful car, a refined interior, in short, everything to please a demanding clientele. But there is a problem. The Fuego, after promising beginnings in the United States, sees its sales drop dramatically. And Renault asks the big question, is the investment to produce this convertible really profitable? The answer is simple, no. The project is abandoned and the Fuego convertible returns to LES, where it will remain hidden in the reserves. A rare gem, forgotten by the general public until it resurfaced in 2012 during its sale. A car that could have breathed new life into the Fuego, but which remained an unrealized dream. And as always, we wonder what would have changed if Renault had dared. Maybe nothing, or maybe everything. So you thought the Fuego had disappeared into oblivion, didn't you? Well, you're wrong. The Fuego was actually much more than just a simple coupe from the 80s. It was a model that, despite headwinds, left its mark on its era. After the Fuego, Renault moved away from the popular coupe with the Laguna Coupe in 2008, which was aimed at a more bourgeois and discarded audience. Another era, another vision. But let's face it, by the end of the 80s, the fashion for the popular coupe was already behind us. Yet the Fuego has nothing to be ashamed of in its career. Faced with sharper GTIs with more aggressive lines and more affordable prices, the Fuego did not sink into oblivion as one might think. The Fuego achieved volumes close to the R15 and R17, despite having a shorter production run. And yes, only the Ford Capri 3 really exceeded the 300,000 copies among its contemporaries. The Fuego, for its part, with less time in production, has been hot on the heels of the Sirocco, which is not so bad after all. And today, it's time to pay tribute to it because it's easy to mock it with its petal seats and its strange design. But look closer, it has this discreet charm, typical of the 80s, and let's face it, its comfort, especially with its famous petal chairs, is far from ridiculous. So the Fuego, it wasn't just a bad taste joke, it was a coupe that knew how to defend itself in an ultra-competitive market with its own strengths, a good dose of comfort, a distinctive design, and quite respectable performances in its high-end versions. Today, it's a real little gem from the 80s that deserves much more than just a smirk. And you, do you have memories in Renault Fuego? Tell me that in the comments, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to find new videos every week.